Herzlich willkommen zum 36. DOK.fest München. Herzlich willkommen zum DOK.fest München at Home 2021. Herzlich willkommen auch hier im Silbersaal des Deutschen Theaters zum letzten DOK.live Filmgespräch dieses Jahr. Und tatsächlich setzt dieses Filmgespräch heute auch nochmal einen ganz interessanten Rahmen in die Reihe unserer DOK.live Filmgespräche. Begonnen hat das ganze Jahr mit Behind the Headlines, hinter den Schlagzeilen, einem Film über investigativen Journalismus hier in Deutschland. Heute sprechen wir über den Film Writing with Fire, einem Film, der aus der indischen Perspektive auf investigativen Journalismus blickt. Und ich freue mich sehr, zu unserem letzten DOK.live-Filmgespräch das Regisseur-Duo heute begrüßen zu dürfen, Rintu und Sushmit Ghosh. Very warm welcome to DOK.fest Studio.
Thank you, Pablo. Very nice to meet you all here.
As I mentioned before, our opening film, Behind the Headlines, gives us an important insight in the work of journalists. We, as the festival, we thought that it's a good time to show a film about journalism. Why did you decide to make a film about journalism?
It was not our initial idea. We didn't imagine it as a journalism film, which is a funny thing to say because the central protagonists are all journalists. We were interested in them as women, first and foremost. And the fact that they are journalists in a region where usually journalists are male and they belong to a dominant caste. So the fact that women belonging to the Dalit caste stepping out of their homes and inhabiting a space which is not created to have them, so that was very interesting. These are women who were wanting to see change and making that happen on an everyday basis. I truly believe that if the characters of this film were not journalists and were scientists or teachers or CEOs of some companies, they would actually be bringing the same ideology, principle towards fighting for justice. And that's what attracted us to them. And of course, then it became like a film about their life and professional life, which is a journalism movie, I guess.
You have already a big way behind you, and you showed your film around the globe already. You won an important prize at Sundance Festival. Big congratulations also for this. When we go back to the very beginning of the film, how did you get in touch with these women?
We actually accidentally discovered their work online. We'd seen a photo essay on journalists working in rural parts of India distributing newspapers, and we were really intrigued because we'd never heard of a model of news collection and distribution that was managed by the journalists themselves. And so when we reached out to them, very curious about the work that they were doing, interestingly, they were at a time where they were shifting from 14 years of print journalism and they were just about to step into digital journalism. And that's around the time we caught them. And very early on in the film, one of the earliest scenes is a scene where Meera is making a pitch to the entire team about the need to shift from print to digital and how they need to do it not only to grow, but to also survive. And that incidentally was the first day of our filming on ground. And it was a 3.5 hour meeting. But by the time we finished filming the meeting, we knew who our characters were going to be. And we were very, very sure that this was a film that we wanted to sort of continue filming our characters over a period of at least 1.5 to 2 years. Little did we know that this was a project that would take up 5 years of our life, but it really was an immersive experience for us as filmmakers. This was the first time we'd done a lot of short nonfiction before, but this was the first time we were working on a feature length story. And yeah, I think it was a series of chances that led us to the work of Khabar Lahariya. And then, as they say. Everything else is history. The world has really lapped up this story, and we're so glad about that.
So your film, Writing with Fire, it's basically telling the story, giving us insight on the work of journalists, female journalists, making a newspaper run only by women. What is the context in India? Could you explain a bit more about the context? How is it seen? How is like the symbolic value of it if a newspaper is run by women only?
It has huge value because not only is it manned in every way by women, and the process from reporting to production to editing to distributions entirely does. So that is an absolutely unique sense of operating a news agency. But more important than that, I think the feminist perspective that they bring to news is also quite unique and important. So in all, the whole package is one of a kind.
And the women are not only, it's not only a women-run newspaper, it's also the fact that they are Dalit women, the lowest caste in India. You mentioned also in the film that it's not usual for journalists to be of the lowest caste. What's that fact? What's the matter of fact? Does giving it to the newspaper an additional surprising value? Yeah.
I think just adding to what Rintu was saying, what really makes their work special is that this is not only an institution led by women journalists, but Dalit women journalists. Just for context, India has had, and most people would know of this, is this very rigorous social hierarchy known as the caste system, where Indian society or Hindu Indian society is divided into 4 principal castes, and then there are subcastes. It's quite complex, but the Dalit community is considered so impure that they are kept completely out of the caste system. And historically, they've always had jobs that are considered very menial, or jobs that require scavenging, etc., etc. And soon after independence, the Indian Constitution prohibited or banned the practice of caste-based discrimination in India, but it's something that has been practiced for centuries. So it's something that has continued in very insidious ways in the country, and you see that play out in the film in many of the cases that the women themselves cover. And I think what really makes the work of the journalists in Khabar Lahariya special is the fact that despite centuries of oppression, and they represent centuries of oppression, not only caste-based oppression, but also gender oppression and violence that they have all been subjected to. And these are women who are using journalism as their tool or as their pen to really change the discourse and the cultural and the social discourse in India through their work. And as you see in the film, when they go into these spaces which are extremely hostile, which are extremely patriarchal, for these men to be confronted by a Dalit woman journalist with a mobile phone who challenges not only their authority, but who stands up to speak truth to power, is something that most people have not experienced or seen or witnessed. And I think over the course of the last 19 years, the journalists at Khabar Lahariya have been chipping away at the caste hierarchy in their own ways, in their own sort of, the very fact that we have Dalit women journalists running the only women-led news institution in the country in itself speaks volumes for the the courage, the tenacity, and the value of their work as journalists. So I don't know how to sort of consolidate what I'm feeling right now in just simple words, because it's a huge deal. And the fact that they are not only growing, but they're growing exponentially now ever since they shifted to digital speaks volumes about the fact that there's a lot of credibility to the work that they're doing on ground as journalists, irrespective of what their gender identity is or what their caste identity is. As journalists, they're really powering through, and their growing numbers and followers is testimony to the value of their work.
Yeah, you mentioned it now. You show us also in the film how they are doing the shift from print to digital and all the struggles that come with it. I asked myself, and you don't show that so much on the film, where does the education, the journalistic education, come from? They seem to have so high journalistic skills, and it's, yeah, like their interview techniques, they really develop the journalistic skills. Where do they learn them?
It's connected to the history itself of Khabar Lahariya. When they started in 2002, an NGO had actually trained a group of women, Dalit women and women from underrepresented communities. And they came and they said, they told them, if you were to create a newsletter about things that are important to you, how would you do that? So they created a newsletter, and it was called Mahila Dakiya. That became the first time that the women actually understood that they can be tellers of their own stories, and the power in that. So when the NGO moved out, the women wanted to continue. So some members of that NGO with the women collaborated, and that's how Khabar Lahariya was born, which then became a 4-page newspaper. And in that form also, I think the most important thing for them is we are visibilizing invisible stories, because the question that they're asking is, what is newsworthy? Because when you put something on a front page of a newspaper, that becomes something that everybody should be concerned about and important. And there's a huge population who never sees itself in those words, on those prints. And it became their mission to actually visibilize the invisible voices, which is their own community. So from being from belonging to that community and reporting on that community has been a really important part, and in a language that they all understand, has been so important to their journey. And they constantly do a lot of workshops and collaborations with journalists across the country, and there's so much peer learning, and a lot of it is also instinct. So when you go to a politician who has promised you so much, and you belong to that constituency, you know what to ask, and they're master negotiators. The idea is to keep asking without antagonizing. And that's something I've personally learned from them. How do you engage with somebody who doesn't necessarily agree with you? And it's not aggression, as we've seen in the film. It's really, just constantly keeping at it. So it's a combination of many things. And they continue to learn and grow, really.
And when you follow them with the camera, for example, to the mines where really they're developing kind of fights between the guys, and the women are really staying so calm and so firm. But you feel watching it, there's kind of a tension, kind of a dangerous tension also in the air. How do they do it? You can't believe that women just stand in front of 30 men shouting at them. Why? How come that they are so firm, so courageous?
I think that's what courage looks like. That's the only answer I have, honestly. We also asked ourselves and them this question in a light way. But that's really moral courage in action.
And how did you feel filming this? Were there also some situations when you felt like in danger sometimes?
I mean, we knew very early on that we were going to be operating in some super hostile spaces. So, you know, the belt or the region that we were filming in is essentially the illegal mining range of Uttar Pradesh, and it's known for its illegal mining mafia. There's a lot of corruption over there. There's a lot of political corruption, administrative corruption. So going in with cameras into these spaces, we were fairly prepared that it was going to be hostile. But I think what made it sort of easy for us was the fact that we were working with journalists who were very well known in the region. So, in that sense, when we would go into these villages where, there have been mining accidents or, someone's been kidnapped or someone's just been murdered, it was typically always the women from Khabar Lahariya who were given first access to these stories, because the communities on ground always really trusted them implicitly and instinctively. I think also the fact that there were women journalists allowed for people to sort of give them that sense of access to their spaces that male journalists wouldn't. And again, as you see in the film, male journalists in that region are really more concerned about clickbaiting, about finding like the big story, about what is going to be mainstream is going to be something that is going to be a part of their storytelling practice. But with the women at Khabar Lahariya, it was always about what is the issue that we are reporting on, even if we have to spend 6 hours traveling to a village that is at the back of beyond to tell the story of one family. But if it is a story that represents our journalistic values and it needs reporting, we'll do it. So I think that kind of sort of like allowed us to film very intimately with them. And yes, there were a lot of situations that could be defined as risky, but because we were with them and we were filming with them, and you've seen in the film how they deal with the idea of danger. It's just like holding your ground firm, not moving. And we were always alongside them filming with our camera. So I think we blended in that sense. And yeah, there were situations, but we just moved along.
And how did the women feel being filmed, being the subject of interest suddenly? Was it easy for them, or was it kind of a work to get to tell your story, to come to the point?
They were used to being filmed because other filmmakers had done shorts on their work. So they were used to the idea of being interviewed. So they had those set sort of like, interview answers in the beginning when we were just sort of figuring out who the central characters would be. But I think what surprised them or confused them was the time period of this whole process, because after the first 7 days of just initial filming, they were like, oh, you're done, right? So when can we watch the film? And we were like, we haven't even begun. So the whole long-term process was new. Another thing that happened was, as we began filming with them is also when they started becoming digital journalists, which meant that they were also understanding the power of being in front of the camera and behind the camera for the first time. And that led to many interesting conversations around representation, around consent, and around our ideas about what the story would be. We were able to have many honest conversations about the fact that we would like to make this a personal story and not just the story of the newspaper. It's really an inside out. So those kind of things help them also understand our vision. And so they were less concerned about what the story is, etc., and more open. And we spent a lot of time with them. So I think that trust became the most important asset in this whole process.
For how long did you stay with them? How long did you shoot the film?
We initially thought 2 years, but it became 5.
And it seems sometimes in the film when the women are doing trips together, going on also on vacation together, they seem like a little family. Is it true?
There's a great amount of kinship and sisterhood between the women. It works as a regular any other organization where there are tough bosses, colleagues, and there are deadlines to be met, and it's gentle and strict whenever it needs to be either of the two. But they are all very invested in each other as friends, and they stayed together for such a long time, so everybody knows each other's personal histories, personalities very well, families very well. So it's a very strong bond and a very intimate relationship that all of them actually share with each other. Yeah, that's also, you see that in the film because it actually is there.
And have you become part of this family as well during the footage, the shooting?
Weirdly, yeah, because I think because we ended up spending so much. So our process was in the first year, we'd go back once every 4 or 5 months. And so every year we were going back at least twice, and ranging from, say, spending 7 days to about 3.5 weeks on ground filming with them. And obviously, I mean, these are spaces because by default we are spending an entire day with the journalists. By the end of the day, like, they'll just be like, come home, have a meal with us, or just, spend the night with the family. And we got to know their husbands and their parents and their kids. And it really became, by the time we did our final shoot schedule, one of the questions that the kids asked us was that, are you never going to come back after this? And that's where the penny dropped. We were like, yeah, I mean, we will come back, but without cameras. And yeah, I mean, I don't think we actually expected to sort of forge such a deep relationship with all of them. But yeah, we've become really good friends, and continue to stay in touch with all of them. So if it weren't for the pandemic, I mean, the original idea was that we'd be traveling with at least Meera, Sunita, and Shamkali to all of these film festivals where the film is playing, so that they are able to sort of like field these questions and respond to a live audience. But hopefully, maybe later in the year when things become better, we might be able to sort of like travel with them to meet a live festival audience.
The women are researching in really terrible cases with about rapists, of murders. How do they manage to come over this, to not suffer about the stories they tell in the newspaper? Do they help each other?
I think this is a very a question that we still haven't found a very coherent answer to, because it's still a mystery how they continue to do this every single day. In the film, we see that because of their reporting, there is impact on ground. There are villages get water, hospitals get built, accountability happens, but in many cases that is not the reality, right? And especially with regards to domestic violence or sexual violence against women, just to get the women's testimony or just to get the case reported and filed in the police station means that they have to be there doing that job continually. And in many cases, the way they work is quite amazing. It's not just about reporting, but also following up. So if they've reported on a case and it's published, they would at least do 2 follow-ups to see what has happened and publish those stories. So there is a very smart way of putting pressure on administration because people are watching. And so I think they get a lot of strength and perspective from each other. There are monthly meetings, there are weekly meetings, people are constantly in touch. the last time I checked, Meera's, like when Meera was showing me, she's a part of some 50 WhatsApp groups. And there are always 3,000 unread messages, constantly. So they're constantly in touch with people, which keeps it real, If you're in the battlefield, like you don't feel exhausted, I guess. It's just every day. And most importantly, in my opinion, it's a deep sense of commitment of each of them believing that if I am not there today with my camera reporting the story, nobody else will. And so I can't afford to be weighed down by this. This is the reality of our lives, but it is possible to change it. It's not going to happen tomorrow or day after, but it's going to happen. And the fact that they've been around for now 19 years is a testament to their tenacity.
And it's a tough workflow they have with each other. You show us many times in the film this kind of feedback rounds they have. Why do you focus, why do you show us so much about their way of giving feedback to each other?
I think at the initial times when we were pitching the film, a lot of times people thought, oh, these are citizen journalists. It's really nice that they are. We really wanted to show the structure and the thought and the rigorous commitment behind the running of the organization. These are professionally trained journalists whose source of income is this, and also a source of commitment. So for us, it became a very important thing that they are not viewed as people who do this, when they feel like. But we needed to make sure that it's a structure within which they work, and from their own working. I think what was important to understand is this is serious work. And without feedback, you have no idea where you're going. And when they transitioned to digital, it was very confusing for most of them to create a new workflow completely, how to access data. Data cards were crashing, phones were crashing. You're working in like 45 to 50 degrees Celsius. Cell phones were like totally giving up. And it is only through these feedbacks and training we could see the growth and the growing confidence of each person. And thirdly, that scene in the film where Meera's telling or encouraging Shamkali to talk about an angle, because Shamkali is asking, what is an angle? So where else do you teach something like this? Where you help create that perspective. And that is very important, because what has news become now? And by these scenes is how we question in the film that news is about perspective, asking the right questions. So I think that was the reason we focus so much on their training process in the film.
It's a moment to switch over to my colleague Zegen. I forgot to introduce you, I'm so sorry. But you are here and you are getting a lot of questions, I hope, from the audience.
Yes, there are actually a lot of questions for you guys from the audience. The first one is, if you already showed the film in India, and then what impact did your film have, and what were the reactions you got from the audience?
So, I mean, the main festivals in India are towards the latter half of the year. So we are hoping to start our India run with a film festival in India. And, eventually we've also designed an impact plan for the film for India. So we're hoping that this film will be screened across, a range of demographics, right? From like, cities all the way into rural spaces and villages. Of course, the pandemic has its own plans, but we are very, very hopeful and committed to be bringing this film back to a home audience later in the year. And we're very curious to see how Indians are going to respond to this film.
Do you have more questions?
Yeah. Another question is, what is the situation right now for the women, and how does the pandemic change the work situation they have?
2020 has been the most busy year for Khabar Lahariya because they've been doing a lot of on-ground reporting and doing a lot of collaborations because now people can't travel. So they have their feet and ear to the ground. 2020 was a really busy year. It's slightly, or I would say a lot more difficult right now because the nature of the virus has changed. It's a lot more virulent now. So they're very much in the thick of things, constantly making sure that the lens is on those communities who are anyway, not in the purview of news. So extremely marginalized communities, villages which are really far off from main towns and cities in Uttar Pradesh, so, getting stories from them and making sure that the administration is aware that health services etc are not basic essentials are not reaching those places. So holding accountability continues to be so they've all pivoted and new ways of working have been created, but they're very much in the thick of things.
You switch over to me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can go on.
Do you understand a bit more the atmosphere where the women are researching or investigating? And you show us also around in villages where they come and there has been a murder, for example. And there's one scene where an older woman says, "This is our thing. This is not your thing. Please stop your investigation." Yeah. How do the people? Is like the typical reaction of the normal people where they are investigating? Are they confronted with a lot of how do you say sorry, I'm searching the right word, but yeah, maybe you understand what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the scene that you're referring to is where one of the journalists is investigating a rape case of an adolescent girl. Rape is peculiar because it is associated with a sense of shame, and therefore people don't want to talk about it because it's the universal concept of a woman's honor, and many times these cases go unreported, and it's really the powerful men in the area who are committing these crimes. So it becomes important for Khabar Lahariya. It's one of their very core philosophies that if it's violence against women, we will encourage them to talk about it. We would want to talk to the woman to get her testimony, to hear her speak, allow her the opportunity to tell her story. And sometimes it's not necessary that they would put it out there. It depends on what consent they get, but it is so cathartic for the woman herself that someone's there to believe my story. I can actually share. So it's very deep, and they get resistance on such cases. And it's just a matter of navigating to make sure that if the family and the woman wants the case to be registered, they would they would do whatever possible for that to happen. In other cases, what we have witnessed is people are mostly welcoming because of the credibility that they have built over the years in the region. There are some times when men want to mansplain and want to give a woman a hard time. So those kind of instances are also there. But their attitude is very much like, I'm here to do my job. And, I will get it done.
And are there already signs that people say, okay, we know you, please come here to investigate? Does this also happen?
Yeah, we saw that happen all the time. I mean, in fact, like the opening scene of the film, where you have the rape survivor narrating her testimony and the husband bearing witness to that, saying, "We don't trust anybody except you." because I think if anybody can bring us any sliver of justice, it is only going to be you. So, and that's been like a constant refrain. Every time we've been on the ground, people have actually reached out to them, invited them into their homes. If it's been like stories that are really sort of like difficult stories or stories centered around trauma, the journalists at Khabar Lahariya have more often than not typically been the first ones who've had access into these geographies, into these homes, into these lives. So yeah, and the fact, I think also what's happened is that, you know, their shift from print to digital was a very smart and a tactical move, because before that they were printing about 5,000 newspapers every month, which would be read by 7 or 8,000 people at most. And typically this would be, the demographic would be, it would be men who were consuming this news, because it was typically men who would have completed their education and have access to, you know, the reading skills too. But ever since they shifted to digital, the demographic dividend has essentially widened. You have more women consuming their news, and more women can now access the reporters at Khabar Lahariya because they're just a message away on Facebook or WhatsApp. And so I think that has also expanded, you know, the scope of their work. It's made their work much more rigorous. But I think that in terms of an audience, you know, they have like much greater visibility within the communities that they have been operating from, but now also expanding to other parts of the country. And before the pandemic, like when we were wrapping filming the end of 2019, early 2020, 2020 was meant to be a year where Khabar Lahariya was supposed to expand to other states in India and set up more bureaus. So, you know, there's an immense amount of credibility to the work that they're doing, and shifting to digital has actually facilitated their visibility, not only at a grassroots level, but I think, you know, nationally and now internationally. A lot of people are sort of talking about them.
And how did the interview partners react seeing you with the camera suddenly? Because the women are used to film with their phones, and you, I guess, you had like professional camera equipment. Could you explain how was the scene then for the interview partners? How did they interact with you?
I mean, very, very early on, we realized that we couldn't go in like a full-blown film crew because of, you know, the regions that we were filming in. These were sensitive spaces. Some of them were hostile spaces. So we decided to essentially work with a crew of 3 people. There was Rintu, me, and Karan, who's a co-cinematographer. And we, in terms of equipment, we were just working with the 5D, a DSLR. So we had 2 DSLRs between us, and, you know, we didn't have a sound person. Rintu doubled up as the sound person. We decided not to have a boom mic because, you know, it attracted too much attention. So it was like working with RF mics, and, you know, these are all sort of like technically challenging circumstances. But the quest was, how do you as a film crew sort of not stand out? And we were clearly outsiders. I mean, we might dress down, but we would still stand out in terms of just the way we looked, the way we spoke the language. But I think our process always was one of sort of melting into the shadows and sort of observing what's happening. And I think what happened was that this was a time where Khabar Lahariya was just shifting to digital. So it was for the first time that, you know, people on the ground were also seeing these women with these mobile phones and these like mics attached to the mobile phones. And because we were shadowing them, I don't think too much currency was given to us, in the sense it was assumed more often than not that, you know, they're a part of the crew. There were some instances, of course, where we went to film with officials and police authorities where, you know, sometimes men would ask Meera, well, now you have men working for you. And Meera would just like, you know, simply point at us and say, oh, these are my trainees from Delhi. So you know, it was like that. So I think at our end was always about how do we literally become sort of invisible and just have our cameras filming without in any which way sort of disturbing the truth or the reality that's playing out in front of us, so that the audience can have a really immersive experience of what it means being a journalist in these parts of India. Because the stakes are really high, the dangers are really high, and sometimes you don't always see a danger, you can feel it, it's very subliminal, and that's the experience that we wanted to give the audience. Like for instance, like, you know, a woman walking through a dark alley at night alone, it's not a big deal, but it actually is a huge deal in these parts of the country. So, you know, so our approach and our style essentially led to our this very sort of like, you know, very peculiar approach to filmmaking, which essentially helped the journalists as well, because it meant that we really weren't interfering with anything that they were doing on ground.
So again, do we have more questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. The first one would be, do you think there is a difference in how media in India works and how media in Western country works? And if you think so, what is the difference?
That's an interesting one. I think, like, I mean, I think Donald Trump has changed the game. I think we are all living in a post-truth era now, and I think everybody knows about the collusion between media and big data, and how these boutique sort of, like, you know, agencies are designing what we are consuming and how we are thinking. And in that sense, I believe that this is also, I mean, the last decade has also been a decade where we have seen the rise of the right all across the world. And it's not a problem that's now just a problem of the global south, right? From the Philippines all the way to Europe, Western Europe, and the US. We've seen the rise of authoritarian political leaders. And the media has been hand in glove in the coming to power of these individuals. And in that sense, I think that, you know, the media in India is no different. And in more ways than one, mainstream media over here is nothing but a circus, really. And that is what makes the work of Khabar Lahariya so much more special, where you are looking at literally a resource-stripped organization who possibly operate at 1/100th the budget of, say, a mainstream Hindi news channel. And yet, in terms of consistency and quality, are delivering news that is really a testimony to what true journalism and journalistic caliber and ethos and ethics is all about. So I think for us, that is essentially that was essentially one of the key drawing points for this story when we started off in late 2015, 2016, that can we still have a model of journalism that works in this democracy? And what would that look like? And how can it be, or can it be that people who have been disenfranchised from, you know, our society, so to speak, actually show us the light, you know? And that was essentially, this was the quest we began on with this story. And by the end of it, we realized that, yeah, this is what true journalism is. And the Khabar Lahariya model of journalism, truly for us, is what the fourth estate is meant to do, to keep a democracy alive and healthy.
Another question is, how are the women selected who are working for the newspaper? Are there specific criteria, skills, or background that you have to have?
The one important criteria is that you have to be from, you have to come from a community that is understood as marginalized. So Dalit, women from oppressed castes, and Muslims. So those tribal belts. So and anyone who comes from a marginalized community is so that's like a prerequisite. And I think in terms of beyond that is this really a quest for justice. And that's what we've been a part of, some of these conversations where new recruits have come and their trainings have happened. The whole focus is on, we're here to, it's a job, but it's also beyond a job. it's a mission. So how aligned are you with the larger philosophy of the organization, and how much are you willing to give everything to this work? So those are the real criteria.
If I can ask one more question, it's a personal one. You guys are co-directors, so Rintu and Sushmit, but and you already talked about in the film, it's about empowering women, it's about Dalit women, and they talk about really specific things that they and their community suffer through. How was it for you, Sushmit, as a man, to be the co-director of the film? Was it a very different experience from you, Rintu, and how did you kind of gain the trust of those women?
So just for brief context, I'd been filming short nonfiction across India for nearly 10 years. And a lot of these stories were stories about people who were outside the system, outliers, and in whose stories we felt there was a lot of power. These are people who had created transformational change in their communities, whether that be themes of climate change and the environment, whether that be social justice, refugee rights, and more often than not, the central protagonists of all of these films were women. So in that sense, I think I came in with that understanding of, filming with women characters. And I think that what makes India a really interesting country is that I think we're a continent, not one nation, because every 100 kilometers, the culture changes, the tradition changes, the food changes. So, we have so many stories. So, having experienced like the length and breadth of this country as a storyteller, going into filming women at Khabar Lahariya with that rich experience really helped me to understand where they were coming from and what their stories were. And this was not the first time I'd worked with, marginalized groups or filmed with marginalized groups. But I do sort of want to say that seeing these journalists at work was a humbling experience, to be honest. This was the first time, of course, that we had embarked on a feature project, and we had no idea how long the story was going to take. We'd given each other 24 months, We didn't realize it was going to take much more than that. And I think over the course of filming this story, what I realized was, as a man, is just the amount of privilege that I have. And I thought, like, I was aware of the class privilege and the caste privilege that I have, but just to be in the midst of these journalists was not only, I think saying it was a humbling experience would reduce it to, something very basic, but I felt really that these are the people who are keeping the light on, who are fighting the good fight on behalf of all of us, and these are the people you wouldn't expect to run the entire distance, because even people like us give up, and we are people in positions of privilege, right? So to see Meera and Sunita and Shamkali and the entire team of journalists working on the ground the way they are, was a humbling experience. But I think there was a lot of allyship between us and them. They knew why we were there, and they knew why as a man I was there. And I think like we had these amazing conversations and bonded about a lot of things. So I think that allowed for me to also work intimately with them as a camera person, whether filming in these village and mining spaces or inside their homes when they're having these crazy arguments with their husbands. But, the camera was always on because there was trust, and, I think that really worked. It was, I suppose, a testament to the friendship that had developed between us. I'm sorry, this is a really long answer, but
no, I think I would just add to that, as someone who observed this play out with two cinematographers, both men, and a co-director was a man. I felt like there was an instant friendship, and the fact that it was both Sushmit and Karan just hanging out with the women, joking around, having deep conversations, spending time with the families, bonding with the husbands. And that's where you can actually understand the character of a person and that person is beyond the filmmaker who's framing you. It's a real person. And most of the times these two had more fun with everybody than I did, and because I would be like focusing on what's next, and these guys would be having a ball. And that's that. Having said that, in the edit, it was a very interesting experience because Anne Fabini, who came on board as a consultant editor, and she and I would feel so strongly about some scenes, and Sushma would be like, "Are you guys sure? I don't really see it." And we would say, like, as women, we see it, and it's important. And eventually Sushmit would get there. So that's also like, some things that are very instinctive for women to respond to because of our collective history and experience of our gender. That would come a little late, but I think he was in the company of very good women.
I was trying hard to keep up. So
There's one rather sad moment at the end of the film when the chief editor is saying, okay, we have so high impact and much impact on the people, and then our group ourselves is not as modern as we are promoting to be, and one of the women is leaving the group and the newspaper to get married. How is the future of the newspaper? Is it still struggling to really maintain these ideas, ideologies, or how do you see it?
The way we see it is that empowerment is not a destination, it's a journey. And that is something that is lived on an everyday basis at Khabar Lahariya. People, you spend such a long time recruiting, training someone, and in their lives, in the lives of so many of these women, like women across the world, there is a dichotomy and a clash between modernity and tradition. These are educated women who fought for their education, doing a job, earning, have the financial independence, and should have the agency to choose their life partners, but are also belonging to a region and families where they're expected to do what the society wants them to do. And this plays out in different forms in each of the lives of our characters and all the 23 women at Khabar Lahariya. It's these negotiations and the way they're had is where success really is. And for them, it's a part of life. It's heartbreaking, but they don't count it as a failure at all. It's just a moment to they do everything that they can to make sure that through conversations and trust, those situations are dealt with. But if someone leaves, someone else will take over.
But on a nuts and bolts level, I see them growing and only growing from here on forth, because now they have new alliances and partnerships, not only in India, but internationally. I do see a coalition building with them. They're getting into some interesting spaces where they're designing training curriculum for journalists. So they have their fingers in a bunch of interesting pies right now, and I only see them growing, and that is the hope.
And there's a small note at the end of the film that the woman who got married, she came back to the newspaper. How does she manage it now? Is she married and working at the same time? Okay, and that's okay for her new family and her husband.
They don't have a choice.
That's cool.
That's who she is. Yeah. I don't think you can get journalism out of her. So, we were also surprised when she left, but we were, honestly, we were just waiting for her to come back. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Second, do we have more questions from the audience?
Yes, we have a couple of questions. You already said that you planned on shooting 24 months and then it ended up to be 5 years. Did you think from the beginning that it would be so long, that you would observe the women for so long, and how did you finance your film?
Yeah, so typically, like the shots that we work on take anywhere between 3 to say 6 months at most to complete from beginning to end. We just extrapolated that data and assumed that it would be 2 years, or and it was, we were fluid with our plans because we were like, let's start on a 2-year journey and let's see where this leads us. And in the first year of filming itself, 2016, we realized that this is going to take longer than we had anticipated. And as we dive deeper into the story itself began to become much more layered, much more complex, much more intersectional. And we didn't want to sort of stop filming. And then again, in 2017, something super critical happened, which plays out in the film. I don't want to reveal that. And that meant that we decided to sort of continue filming by another. So in 2017, we were like, let's film another year. In 2018, we decided to extend it by another year. So, that's how it played out. And I'm glad that we did that, because if we had finished in 2 years, this would look like a very different film. In terms of funding, so we continued to keep pitching the film in all of these international forums. So we first started in DOK.edge, Kolkata, from where we had an opportunity to travel to the Sheffield meat market, where we met a lot of commissioning editors who were interested in the project. We met lots of heads of funds as well. And as we kept presenting, we also went to the ITFA forum. And as we kept presenting the film, we were also writing proposals. And eventually, one by one, we had the ITFA Bertha come on board as an ally. We had Sundance, Tribeca, Doc Society, one by one. So the financing, took time to come in, but eventually it started coming in. And for anyone who's starting off with their first features, don't expect the money to come in like that. It is a time-consuming process. It takes time. You've got to wait it out. But if you're onto a story that you truly believe in, the resources find their ways. What we've always believed in, and that was the case with Writing with Fire as well.
Mm-hmm. One other question is, what was the biggest challenge in making this film for you two?
Which one was the big?
I would say the heartbreak, in a very selfish way, is now where the film's made and we are unable to sort of travel with it and watch the film with audiences in a theater, or have our protagonists with us as we go to these different. And it's, as Pablo said, we've been lucky that the film is already played in such spectacular festivals, and people have been mailing in and messaging us about the story, and so many questions. And it just I think this has for me been the hardest part, just not being able to premiere a film after 5 years of just this loneliness of what documentary filmmaking is about. You expect to burst out there, like surrounded by audiences and your viewers, where you're talking to them. That's something that I find challenging.
I have another one. I mean, there are many, many challenges, but I think the fact that our marriage had to be, has survived all of this is I think a challenge that we lived happily, because if we are not just married, but also running a company here, directing the film together, editing it in a pandemic year where we were shut in and in each other's face 24/7.
Not easy.
That was not easy.
Yeah.
That was very, very hard. And yeah, I think just to manage that in interesting and not very interesting ways was a happy challenge.
Congratulations. I think you did a great job, and I'll give over to Pablo for some final questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're almost done, but let's still have some perspective to the future. Where do you hope this film is going to? What is else to come? What do you hope for this film?
No, go ahead. It's a long one.
I'll keep it brief. I hope that this film is able to spotlight the work of these journalists. I hope that people are able to find the courage to imagine other possibilities. I think that one of the most beautiful things that someone mailed us in was he's a journalist with the New York Times, and he mailed in saying that I thought we had it difficult as journalists in the Trump era, but when I watched this film, it's a great context piece to what working in dangerous conditions and in dangerous times really is all about. So I hope that more people are able to watch Writing with Fire and find meaning in the film in any which way, and are able to see that, and are able to see Mira's vision. And that vision is not just the vision of building a newspaper institution, but it's actually much larger. It's the vision of another world is possible. Another world of possibilities exists, but we all need to fight to make that happen. So my only hope would be that this film is able to be seen by audiences across the world, and that they are able to, enjoy it and understand it and absorb it, and hopefully create meaningful change in whichever way they're inspired to.
We are very, very happy to have your film in our program, and I wish you all the best for the future of the film and the future of you two as filmmakers. Thank you so much for the interview and taking the time so late in the night in India.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sie haben noch bis zum 23. Mai die Möglichkeit, Writing with Fire bei uns im Programm im DOK.fest München 2021 zu sehen. Und nicht vergessen, auch abzustimmen für den Kino-Publikumspreis, der auch dieses Jahr wieder gestiftet wird vom Bayerischen Rundfunk und von 3Sat. Also abstimmen, diesen Film unbedingt noch anschauen. Ein ganz, ganz wichtiger Beitrag über Journalismus in Indien. Und damit verabschieden wir uns. Ciao.